I'm Elena Rodriguez, 32 years old, and I've learned the hard way that sometimes the deepest wounds don't come from strangers. They come from the people who are supposed to love you the most. My father, Victor Rodriguez, was the kind of man who built his identity on hard work, tradition, and machismo. For 30 years, he worked his way up from construction laborer to owning Rodriguez Construction, a company that built half the homes in Fresno. The business was his life, his 2 sons were his pride, and me? I was just there. The day before his 60th birthday party, I stood on my San Francisco balcony overlooking the bay, rehearsing words I wasn't even sure I wanted to say. A few polite sentences, a toast maybe, something safe, expected. Because that's how I'd lived most of my life, trying to avoid giving him more ammunition for disappointment. Behind me on the kitchen counter, the framed photo sat wrapped in brown paper. Simple, heartfelt. Inside was something that had once meant everything to both of us. As I practiced my lines, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That no matter what I said, it wouldn't matter, because no matter what I achieved, it never did. Before I go any further, tell me in the comments, have you ever been overlooked by someone who is supposed to see your worth? If so, hit that like button and subscribe. This story might sound familiar, and maybe, just maybe, it will help you see things differently too. Growing up in Fresno, California, the Rodriguez house was strict, traditional, and stifling. We weren't wealthy, but respect was earned through sweat and muscle. My brothers, Diego and Carlos, were everything my father wanted, tough, hands-on, ready to carry on the family business. My father worshipped them. They could do no wrong. And then there was me. I was quiet, thoughtful, fascinated by how buildings stood up against earthquakes. I'd hide architectural magazines under my bed like other girls hid romance novels. I built earthquake-resistant models from cardboard and tape when I was 12. They actually worked during my bedroom shake tests. My mother smiled proudly. My father asked why I wasn't playing with dolls like normal girls. I learned early that I didn't fit his vision. He never said it directly, he didn't need to. It was in the way he introduced my brothers at neighborhood barbecues. This is Diego, my structural engineer, and Carlos runs 3 construction crews now. Then he'd gesture toward me with a tight smile and say, and that's Elena. She likes to draw buildings. Draw, as if my work was just pretty pictures. I graduated summa cum laude in structural engineering from Stanford while working nights to pay for what financial aid didn't cover. No one from my family attended the ceremony. My father sent a brief text, "Good job, Mija." Didn't know it was today. Still, I kept trying. I landed the position no one expected, senior structural engineer at Morrison Design Group in San Francisco. I worked overtime, designed earthquake-resistant high-rises, earned recognition from the city's planning commission. By 28, I was leading seismic safety projects. By 30, I was the youngest Latina to head a major structural division in the Bay Area. But at every family gathering, when Papa raised his glass, he toasted Ms. Hios. So when I got the invitation to his 60th birthday celebration, a big community hall affair with mariachi music, speeches, and a photo display of his construction projects, I almost didn't go. Almost. But something in me needed to be there. Not for him. For me. That week, I drove down to Fresno, stayed at a modest hotel near downtown, and tried to rehearse something safe, something that wouldn't make things worse, something that wouldn't hurt. Because what I didn't tell anyone, not even my therapist, was that I still carried this foolish little hope inside me that maybe, just maybe, this would be the night he'd finally say something different. Something real. Instead, the night would end with me handing him that wrapped photo and walking away for good. But not yet, because the rehearsal was still just that, a rehearsal. I still believed in some small, desperate way that maybe if I said the right words, wore the right dress, smiled just right, I could rewrite the story, fix what was broken. But I didn't know yet what he was going to say in his speech, and I didn't know how badly it would cut, or how freeing it would feel to finally bleed and walk away standing tall. I arrived at the community center 20 minutes early, not because I wanted to, but because anxiety has a way of making me overcompensate. The parking attendant waved me toward a spot and I hesitated. The silver Prius wasn't flashy by San Francisco standards, but in my father's world, it screamed city girl who forgot where she came from. Still, I parked and walked toward the decorated entrance. The hall was already half full. Round tables covered in bright tablecloths, centerpieces made of marigolds and construction tools, waiters weaving between families speaking rapid Spanish. A slideshow of my father's construction projects played on a loop behind the small stage. His weathered face filled the screen, standing in front of half-built houses, shaking hands with city officials, presenting keys to proud homeowners. There were family photos mixed in, but they were all of him with Diego and Carlos at job sites, wearing hard hats and work boots. No pictures of me at my graduation, no shots of my building designs. Just him and his boys building the American dream with their bare hands. I stood near the entrance, scanning for familiar faces. My mother caught my eye from across the room and waved, a quick, warm motion before she turned back to arranging food on the buffet table. She always had a way of loving me quietly, carefully, when Papa wasn't watching. Mira. Look who finally made it, came a voice behind me. Diego. He looked like a younger version of our father, work shirt, calloused hands, genuine smile. Carlos followed close behind, giving me a quick hug that smelled like sawdust and cologne. Elena, Diego said, squeezing my shoulder. Still designing those fancy towers in the city? Still at Morrison Design, I answered, my voice steady. Right, the paper buildings, Carlos added with a grin. Papa always says you build castles in the air while we build real homes. I smiled, practiced and hollow. Well, my paper buildings survived the last earthquake just fine. They laughed, not meanly, just like they always did when I tried to defend my work, and moved on to greet their crew supervisors. And just like that, I was 12 again. The odd one out. The daughter who chose blueprints over hammers, equations over calluses. A server passed with horchata. I took one. Across the room, I spotted my father, broad-shouldered, commanding in his best guayabera shirt. He stood surrounded by contractors and community leaders, his laugh echoing over the mariachi music, his gestures grand and confident. The king of his small kingdom holding court. I waited for him to look my way. He didn't. But he embraced my brothers, slapped their backs with pride, introduced them to everyone as Ms. Muchachos Fuertes. He kissed my mother's forehead and called her mi reina. And when the MC asked everyone to take their seats, he didn't notice I was still standing at the edge of the room, quietly wondering if I should have stayed in San Francisco. Just as I turned to leave, I felt a gentle touch on my arm. Elena, my mother's voice was soft but urgent. Por favor, don't go. He'll say something. He has to. Tonight's about La Familia. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that maybe, for once, he'd recognize more than just his two sons and their construction skills. That maybe, after everything, he'd say my name with the same pride he reserved for Diego and Carlos. But then the lights dimmed, and the MC took the microphone. Señoras y señores, tonight we celebrate a pillar of our community, a man who dedicated over 3 decades to building the homes and dreams of Fresno. Please welcome the one and only Victor Rodriguez. Thunderous applause filled the hall. My father stepped onto the small stage, waving like a politician, his chest puffed with pride as he waited for the cheers to die down. Gracias, gracias, he began, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd earned respect with his hands. This has been the journey of a lifetime, and I wouldn't be standing here without the support of mi familia increíble. I leaned forward in my chair. He beamed. My sons, Diego and Carlos, have always made me proud. Both of them work with their hands, both chose to build, to create, to serve our community. Everything I achieved, I owe to them. They represent the Rodriguez name with strength and honor. Applause thundered through the room. People actually stood and clapped, shouting bravo. Then his tone shifted, almost dismissive. Now, not every child is cut from the same cloth, and that's okay. Not everyone understands what real work means. Some prefer He didn't say my name, but he didn't need to. I felt my stomach drop as the words hit like a punch. The room seemed to tilt as public humiliation washed over me. Elena sits at a desk all day, pushing papers about buildings she'll never touch. Real construction is a man's job. My sons build with their hands while she just draws pretty pictures. Scattered chuckles rippled through the crowd. Then came the line that shattered everything: when the next earthquake hits, her buildings will probably fall down anyway. The laughter that followed wasn't kind. It was sharp, cutting, final. I stood. Every conversation stopped. Every eye found me as I walked slowly toward the stage, not rushing, not shrinking. I held the brown-wrapped photo in both hands. My voice was steady, clear. "From your greatest work that you never saw," I said in English, then repeated in Spanish for everyone to understand, "de tu obra más grande que nunca viste." I placed the gift in his hands, looked him straight in the eye, and added, "Enjoy your birthday, Papa." And I turned, my heels clicking against the polished concrete floor, not a single part of me hurrying or hiding. I walked past the mariachi band, past the shocked faces, past the whispers. I didn't look back. I didn't drive back to San Francisco immediately after leaving the community center. Instead, I parked in the empty lot of a nearby Denny's, engine off, hands gripping the steering wheel. My chest felt tight, but not with panic. Not anymore. What I felt was something colder, quieter, like finally stepping out of a house that had been on fire for years. On my passenger seat, my phone buzzed constantly. A text from Mom, another from Maya, my colleague who'd warned me not to go. Then another, "Que había en la foto?" That one was from Carlos. I didn't answer. I didn't even read the messages, because I already knew what was happening inside that decorated hall, the moment I had walked out of and the life I was finally ready to leave behind. I knew my father wouldn't open the package immediately, not in front of the crowd. He was too proud for that, too concerned with maintaining his image. But the curiosity would eventually win, because if there's one thing Victor Rodriguez hated more than disrespect, it was not knowing what was happening around him. It would take him less than 10 minutes. The package was simple. Inside it was a single framed photograph, one he had probably forgotten existed. A print I'd kept in a worn envelope at the bottom of my dresser for over 20 years. It was a photo of the two of us, taken when I was 12. We were at a construction site where a building had collapsed in the Northridge earthquake. He hadn't wanted to bring me, Mom convinced him I needed to see real work. I remembered how uncomfortable he looked in his hard hat, pointing at the twisted steel beams while explaining why the building had failed. But something had shifted that day when I asked him, "¿Cómo podemos hacer edificios más fuertes?" How can we make buildings stronger? For 5 whole minutes, he'd looked at me like I understood something important. Someone had snapped the picture at just the right moment, me in an oversized hard hat, him with his hand on my shoulder, both of us staring at the damaged structure. A real smile on his face, not the practiced one he used for business photos. That moment was the last time I ever remember him looking at me like I had potential. I'd kept the photo, waiting for the right time to give it back to him. Not as a weapon, not as guilt, but as a reminder of what he'd chosen to ignore. Beneath the frame, I had placed a note in simple handwriting. It read, "This was the last time you looked at me like I could build something that mattered. I spent 20 years trying to prove you right. I'm done now." He'd open that package and see himself, not the version he performed for his community, but the one who could have been a father. The one who, even if just for 5 minutes, was. Back in the car, I didn't cry. I thought I would, but instead I felt something else, a strange kind of peace. It's hard to explain. It's what happens when you finally stop building bridges to people who keep burning them down, when you realize the foundation you've been trying to repair was never solid to begin with. I pulled out my phone, not to respond, but to check social media. Sure enough, someone had already posted a video clip from the speech. You couldn't hear what I said as I walked to the stage, the mariachi music was too loud. But you could see the way I handed him the package, calm, deliberate, controlled, and then turned and left. not a stumble in my step. The comments were mixed. Some thought it was disrespectful, others applauded the boldness. A few criticized me for embarrassing an old man. But what struck me most were the private messages from strangers. I wish I had your strength. My father treats me the same way. That line about paper buildings broke my heart. I didn't respond, not yet, but I read them all. Because for the first time in my life, someone was listening. Someone was seeing me, not just as the ungrateful daughter in someone else's success story, but as the architect of my own. And somewhere inside that decorated community hall, Victor Rodriguez was holding a photograph he couldn't explain away, the image of a daughter he had dismissed and the version of himself he had abandoned. The first call came just before midnight. I let it ring. Then the second. Then the third. By the time my phone lit up for the sixth time, I finally looked at the screen. Mama. I hesitated. My thumb hovered over the green icon. Then I picked up. Elena, she said, her voice tight and worried. ¿Qué había en ese paquete? I didn't answer right away. I could hear voices in the background, muffled, heated. My father's voice, low and sharp, cutting through the Spanish like a machete. You already know, I said quietly. It was the only memory I ever had of him believing in me. She didn't speak at first. Then, you embarrassed him in front of everyone. I nearly laughed. No, Mama. He's been embarrassing me for 30 years. A long silence passed. Finally, she whispered, he didn't mean to hurt you, Mija. He doesn't know how to show feelings. He was raised to believe emotions make men weak. I wasn't asking for emotions, I said, my voice steady. Just respect. And after tonight, I'm done asking. I hung up before she could reply, because the truth was, I didn't trust what would come next. Her defense of him, or her guilt about me. Maybe both. The next morning, I turned off my phone and spent hours walking aimlessly through downtown Fresno. It felt strange, watching people buy groceries and walk their dogs while the emotional equivalent of an earthquake had just reshaped my life. By noon, I turned it back on. 42 unread messages. I skipped the ones from Diego and Carlos. I already knew what they'd say. Defend Papa, accuse me of disrespecting the family, accuse me of being dramatic, ungrateful, too influenced by the city. But one message stood out, from Papa. Just 3 words, necesitamos hablar. We need to talk. I stared at it for a long time. There was no anger in those words, no apology either. Just 3 words that felt like a command, the way everything from him always did. Later that evening, I found myself driving toward my childhood home, not out of duty, but out of something harder to define. Closure, maybe. Or curiosity. The house looked exactly the same, stucco walls, brown trim, the Virgin Mary statue in the front yard, like nothing ever changed, even when everything had. I knocked instead of using my old key. Inside, it smelled like coffee and pine sol. I found him in the living room, alone, sitting in his recliner, holding the framed photo. He didn't look up when I entered. For a full minute, we sat in silence. Then, without looking at me, he said, "No recuerdo ese día." "Of course you don't," I said. It mattered to me. That made him flinch, barely visible but there. He set the photo on the side table. "You think I never cared about you?" "I don't think it," I replied. "I lived it." "I was hard on you," he said quietly, "because I saw something in you." Something stubborn, questioning. "No," I corrected. "You pushed me away." "There's a difference." Finally, he looked at me. "I didn't know how to handle a daughter like you. You weren't like other girls. You didn't want to please, you wanted to argue. You challenged everything." I crossed my arms. "And that made me less worthy of your pride?" He hesitated, like the answer was complicated, but he didn't know how to say it in either language. "You reminded me of my father," he finally said. "The way you questioned tradition, the way you thought you were better than where you came from. He never respected what I built either." There it was. The generational cycle of hurt, passed down like a family curse. I sank into the edge of the couch, suddenly drained. So I spent my life being punished for something that had nothing to do with me. You were never a failure, Elena, he said. I just didn't know how to raise a daughter like you. You didn't try, I replied. You just ignored me until I stopped trying to be seen. He looked at me again, really looked this time. I saw you. I just didn't know what to do with what I saw. That was the closest I'd ever get to an apology, and strangely, it was enough. Not because it fixed anything, it didn't. But because I finally understood I had spent my whole life trying to earn something he was never able to give. And that wasn't my failure. It was his. 2 weeks passed before I fully realized the burden I'd been carrying was gone. Not lighter, not temporarily set aside. Gone. It didn't leave with drama or fanfare. It left quietly, like a weight that had been pressing on my chest for so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe freely. The need for approval. The hunger for acknowledgement. The fantasy that one day my father would look at me and say, "Estoy orgulloso de ti." He wouldn't, and somehow that truth no longer destroyed me. It liberated me. I drove back to San Francisco on a Sunday morning. The car climbed through golden hills and past sprawling vineyards, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was running away from something. I was simply going home, back to a life I had constructed with my own vision and determination. No family connections, no inherited reputation. Just talent, persistence, and the belief that I could transform pain into power. Morrison Design welcomed me back like I hadn't just demolished decades of family expectations. The firm was busy preparing a major project, the seismic retrofit of 3 historic downtown buildings. I was leading the structural analysis, and though the work was demanding, it felt like solid ground beneath my feet. One afternoon, about 10 days after my return, my project director stopped by my office. "You're still available for the conference next month?" she asked. I looked up. "The Seismic Safety Summit?" She nodded. "You're the youngest lead engineer we've ever sent, and given your background, your perspective could inspire a lot of the younger women in structural engineering." I knew what she meant by your background. She didn't mean my degrees or my projects. She meant the fact that I'd climbed this mountain without a safety net, that I'd had to prove myself in rooms full of men who looked like my father, that I'd succeeded not because of my family, but in spite of them. "I'm ready," I said. "Absolutely." That night, I sat on my apartment balcony overlooking the Bay Bridge and opened my laptop. The first line of the speech came immediately. Sometimes the strongest foundations aren't built on solid ground. They're built on the refusal to let anyone tell you you can't. I told the truth about growing up in a house where being a daughter meant being dismissed, about how expertise can be ignored if it comes from the wrong gender, about how crushing it is to be invisible in your own family, and how liberating it is when you finally stop performing for people who will never applaud. And I ended it with a message I wish someone had told me at 16, or 22, or even 30, you don't need anyone's permission to build something beautiful. Some traditions deserve to crumble, and sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is walk away. Not in bitterness, but in clarity. The video of that speech would later go viral, but that wasn't the point. The point was, I meant every word. My brothers didn't reach out, not after the party, not after the fallout, and that was fine. I had stopped chasing people who only saw me as a problem to solve. My mom called a few times. Our conversations were careful, tender, like walking on fresh concrete. But slowly, the foundation began to set. "I should have done more," she said once. "I should have defended you." "I know," I replied. "But I also know you loved me, even when you couldn't show it in front of him." The most unexpected moment came in the mail, a small envelope, no return address. Inside was the photo, the same photo, the one I had given my father. On the back, a note handwritten in the careful script I recognized as his, "No olvide ese dia. Solo trate de hacerlo, porque me asustaba cuanto a me esa virgin de ti. Mauritius mas de lo que ted." Lo siento. I didn't forget that day. I just tried to, because it scared me how much I loved that version of you. You deserved more than I gave. I'm sorry. No signature, no flowery closing. Just that. I stared at the note for a long time, then folded it and placed it in the same drawer where I used to keep every awkward birthday card he'd ever given me. The drawer wasn't filled with hurt anymore. It was filled with understanding. Because sometimes the apology doesn't come the way you imagined, and sometimes it doesn't come until after you've stopped waiting for it. That's what healing looks like. It's not perfect, it's not dramatic, but it's real. And it's enough. So if you're watching this and you've ever felt like the invisible one, the disappointment, the one who didn't fit, know this: you don't have to earn someone's love to be worthy of it. Stand tall, move forward, and if you need to walk away. It's strange how endings rarely feel like endings when they actually happen. You think they'll be dramatic, definitive, movie-like. But more often, they arrive quietly, on a Tuesday afternoon while reviewing blueprints, or on a peaceful Sunday morning when your phone doesn't ring and you realize you're finally content with that. 3 months had passed since my father's birthday party, since the night I handed him the wrapped photo, since I stopped performing for a man who only ever celebrated my brothers. My story, or at least the part of it that people witnessed, had gained attention online. The speech at the Seismic Safety Summit was shared by women in engineering groups, construction firms, even mentorship programs. A journalist reached out. They wanted to write a profile, not just about the viral moment, but about what it meant to grow up dismissed in your own home and still become someone worth recognizing. At first, I hesitated, but then I realized this wasn't just my story anymore. It was the story of every daughter who sat quietly while her brothers got praised, every girl who was told she was too stubborn, too ambitious, not traditional enough, every woman who worked twice as hard for half the recognition and still showed up the next day. So I said yes. The article was titled "The Foundation She Built Herself." It opened with the scene from the birthday party, me standing up, handing my father a package, and walking away without looking back. But what mattered more was everything that came after: the work, the determination, the choice to redefine success on my own terms. One paragraph stood out to me more than any other. It read, "Elena Rodriguez didn't burn bridges. She simply stopped building them where they were never meant to stand." That line stayed with me, because for years I thought setting boundaries was disrespectful, that walking away from family expectations made me ungrateful or too Americanized. But now I understood: boundaries aren't walls. They're blueprints. They show you what's worth constructing and what needs to be demolished. Not long after the article ran, I got a message from a name I didn't recognize at first: Natalia Morales. My cousin, my father's brother's daughter. We hadn't spoken in years, barely even knew each other. Her message read, "I read your story." It made me sob. You probably don't know this, but my papa treated me the same way. Always said men were the builders, women were just there to make them comfortable. I wish I'd had the strength to do what you did. Thank you for showing me it's not too late to rewrite the blueprint. I responded with a single line: "It's never too late to stop making yourself smaller." That's the part nobody tells you: you don't heal all at once. It's not a demolition, it's a renovation. Some days the foundation feels solid, some days you find new cracks, but slowly, carefully, you rebuild stronger. I still hadn't spoken to my father since his note, the one he'd sent without his name on the envelope. It hadn't said "Te amo." It hadn't asked to meet. But in its own fractured way, it had said, "I see it now." And honestly, that was enough, because I no longer needed him to say the perfect words. I had stopped waiting for his approval to feel valuable. I had learned to speak those words to myself: "I love who I've become. I love the girl who kept building even when no one noticed. The woman who stopped asking to be chosen and started choosing herself." The next time I visited the Central Valley, it wasn't to see my parents. It was for a panel at UC Merced: first-generation college students, Latina engineers, dreamers with calloused hands and brilliant minds. I told them the truth, that sometimes your biggest barrier shares your last name, that proving people wrong isn't nearly as powerful as proving yourself right, and that no matter where you start or who doubts you, you are never a failure for being different. You are only a failure if you stop building your own future. Afterward, a girl no older than 19 walked up to me and asked, "Como supiste cuando era hora de dejar de intentar ganar su aprobación?" How did you know when it was time to stop trying to win his approval? I smiled. No lo supe, I said. Just woke up one day and realized I already had mine. Remember, some foundations need to crumble, some traditions deserve to be questioned, and sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away with your dignity intact.